Well, thank you very much, Ron. Ron and I have been through a few football games together. He's mostly been critical, and I've had to endure that criticism, but we've been good friends for a long time. As I got up early this morning and drove from Lincoln to Omaha, got on a plane, came down here, I realized I'm getting older. And this was driven home to me not long ago. I was asked to visit somebody in a nursing home, a very large nursing home, and I was wandering around trying to find the room. And finally I saw this nice little lady coming down the hallway, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm looking for this room and I can't find it." She said, "Oh, you poor dear." She said, "You just go to the front desk and they'll tell you who you are." And so when that kind of stuff starts happening to you, you're getting pretty old. And when you get old, you live in the past. And I thought I'd tell you one recollection I have of one of our past bowl games. Wasn't a particularly illustrious or important bowl game, but coaching is difficult. I know Dennis Francione's here tonight, and some other coaches, and so I think they can relate to this. But we were playing North Carolina in the Liberty Bowl, and we weren't playing very well. Matter of fact, we were trailing 17-14. It was late in the game. They had the ball, and they were in our territory, and it looked pretty much hopeless. And then all of a sudden, they fumbled, and we recovered. And our quarterback that night was a guy named Randy Garcia. And Randy came running over to me and says, "Coach, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know, Randy. We've tried everything. I can't think of anything right now. What do you want to do?" And he said he couldn't think of anything either. So our trainer was standing right beside me, and he heard this conversation. He began to worry we weren't going to do anything. And so he spoke up and he said, "Well, why don't you run play number 8 to the right, 7 to the left?" I was surprised he even knew any of our plays, and I said, "Randy, that sounds as good as anything. Run 8 to the right, 7 to the left." So Randy went out there, and we went 8 to the right, and went about 12 yards, and 7 to the left, about 10 yards, and 8 to the right, another good gain, 7 to the left, another good gain. We went right down the field, looked better than we had all night. Got a first down at about the 5-yard line, and they changed their defense, and we went 8 to the right. Defensive end broke through, we lost 2 yards. 7 to the left, defensive end on that side broke through, we lost another 2 yards. Lost another yard, 8 to the right. So it was 4th down and 10, time going really short. And Randy began to look at me over on the sideline, and some of you have done some coaching, realize what I did at that point. I began to look up in the stands and pretend I didn't see him. And so pretty soon they got back in the huddle, and they called the play, and they came out of the huddle, and I began to watch again. I was kind of interested in what was going to happen here. And I could have sworn he gave the ball to I.M. Hip. His full name was Isaiah Moses Hip. He was our tailback. He ran in the line of scrimmage, and about 5 guys from North Carolina hit him. I figured, well, that's it. 4th down, no time left, game's over. And then I saw that Randy had made the greatest fake I'd ever seen. He'd hit the ball in his hip. And he raised up, and he threw the ball to our split end, Tim Smith, standing all by himself in the end zone. So last play of the game, we win the game, 2017, and went in the locker room. And again, those of you who've done any coaching, as I met with the press, realized what I did at that point. I took full credit for the victory. But the last guy to leave the locker room was Randy. He was over in the corner dressing. I called him over. I said, "Randy," I said, "how in the world did you come up with that play at that time?" Because it was one of those plays we'd had in our playbook, and it hadn't worked a couple times early in the year, and we just dropped it. We hadn't even practiced it for 3 months. I'd forgotten all about it. He said, "Well, it wasn't that hard, Coach." He said, "We're running 8 to the right, 7 to the left." I said, "Yeah, I knew that." He said, "It seemed like we got down near the goal line, 8 and 7 wasn't working very good." I said, "Hey, I noticed that too." He said, well, I didn't know what to do. So he said, I just got back in the huddle, and he said, I added 8 and 7 together. And he said, I came up with play number 14, and that's what I called. And I said, now, wait a minute, Randy, you think a minute. I said, 8 and 7 and 14 at 15. He said, you know, Coach, he said, if I was as smart as you are, we'd lost the ball game tonight. And so anyway, that's a mostly true story of my coaching career. Wasn't all that good. But I did coach for 36 years. And during that 36 years, saw a lot of changes. First was a graduate assistant in 1962, and ended up around 1998 at the end, and saw a lot of changes. When we first went out recruiting in the 60s, early 60s, almost never did you recruit a young guy that didn't live in the same home with both biological parents. But as time went on, we began to see family structure change. And so today, 53%, over half of our kids, growing up without both biological parents, whereas that was only about 5% at one time. And 26 million fatherless kids in our country today. And so that has changed significantly. And so over time, I was spending more and more time dealing with personal issues and personal baggage, and less time with X's and O's and practice schedules. And of course, the drug culture hit and some of the other things. And so I became aware of the fact that it's pretty difficult for a young person to weave their way through anymore. And so we started a mentoring program, and currently we're mentoring 8,000 kids across Nebraska into Iowa. And so there's a book on some of the tables that kind of chronicle that. But I think that as was mentioned here by Rodney and then Maddie as well, I think probably the greatest challenge that's facing our country today is not some of the events in the Middle East. It's not the economy. It's not all the things that you hear about in the political debates. The number one concern that I have is what's happening to our young people. Because no great country, no great civilization is more than one generation away from serious decline. And so the next generation has to be able to hold things together. And so that's where the FCA comes in. And so currently there are about 80 million kids between the ages of 6 and 18. And about 50 million of those 80 million will at some point have played on a team and will have had a coach. And sometimes the only really positive role model a young person sees is the coach. And it depends on what kind of person that coach is. But as has been mentioned by Rodney and others here, the coach is in a unique position. And so the FCA right now is spending a lot of time ministering to coaches and trying to get coaches positioned to where they understand it's not just about X's and O's. It's not just about winning. It's about building character. It's about carrying on the things that have to be carried on with young people and spiritual growth and all these kinds of things. So anyway, just want to let you know that the mission of the FCA is critical. And so again, being older, I lived in the past a lot. I want to reflect on a very significant date in my life. It's December 7th, 1941. And that date may ring a bell with some of you because that was the date that Pearl Harbor was attacked. And I was sitting in my grandparents' living room at age 4. And I remember my dad's reaction when that news came over the radio. He jumped out of his chair and he said, "I'm going to get into this thing." And so he did. He joined up He was 35 years old. He had a wife and 2 kids. Didn't have to go, but he's a patriotic guy. So he was gone for 5 years and didn't see him. I remember how inadequate I felt because I was the only child in my kindergarten class, my first grade, second grade, and then started the third grade, who didn't have a father present. Because those kids' fathers were old enough, they didn't have to go, and they didn't go. My dad wasn't there. I knew my dad loved me. I knew he was trying to do something to make the world a better place. But I still came face to face with father absence and some of the things that so many kids are experiencing today. And so my dad came home in late 1945, and he was a stranger to me. He left when I was 4, he came back when I was 9, and so I wanted to please him, and he was interested in athletics, and so I knew that maybe I could please him through athletics, and so I played them all: football in the fall, basketball in the winter, track in the spring, baseball in the summer, and athletics was my life. It was a little bit of a neurotic type of thing. I certainly enjoyed athletics, but it wasn't a case so much of wanting to be good, more a case of having to be good. I think my reasoning in kind of a convoluted way was like this. If I am a good enough athlete, then people will approve of me. And if enough people approve of me, then maybe I can approve of myself. So that was kind of the motivation I had. And so I had some success and had some chances to go to some major colleges. And the football coaches said, well, if you come here, you can only play football. And the basketball coaches said, if you come here, you can only play basketball. And I wanted to play both, so I went to a small college and played both, played all sports. It was about 1957, between my sophomore and junior year. I heard about a camp out in Estes Park, Colorado. And so I went out there for some reason by myself, drove out in my car, and it was the second FCA camp ever held. And just this last fall, we had a reunion, a 60-year reunion of many of those same guys. And so it was sometime during that week that something happened that was very significant. I ran across a verse of scripture. It was in Matthew, and Jesus was speaking, and he said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And I guess my faith was pretty much a second-hand faith. The faith of my parents, and I'd gone to church, and I'd been in Sunday school, but it really wasn't my faith. And at that point, I began to see the challenge articulated by those people who were at that camp. And I began to realize that this whole thing of denying yourself and taking up your cross was serious business. And Jesus, you see, this was before he was crucified, obviously, that he spoke. And he knew what the cross was. And he knew what it meant, because the Romans kept people in line by crucifying them. And this wasn't a hidden activity. Those people on those crucifixes were along the roadside. And everybody could see those agonizing death. It would take hours and sometimes days. And what a humiliating, what an agonizing experience it was. So he knew that those people were scourged, 39 lashes, and they carried their cross to their death. And so he said, you know, if you're really serious about this, you've got to be ready to carry a cross, and it may cost you your life. And so I began to understand a little bit about the challenge. And I saw the adventure, and I saw something that I hadn't seen before. And then that verse of scripture went on, and it went like this: if any man would save his life, he will lose it. I guess what impacted me at that point was the fact that I've been trying to save my life through athletics. Because I think what Jesus was saying is whatever's most important, what takes most of your time, your effort, your resources, your talents, what you dedicate those things to is your bet as to how you're going to save your life. And I had been investing almost all of my time, my energy, and my talent in athletics. And I realized that at some point that was going to run out. Athletics wasn't going to last forever. And so the other half of the verse of Scripture was more important. He said, if anyone would lose his life for my sake, he will find it. If a man will lose his life for my sake. And I guess essentially what he was saying is if you put him first and you dedicate your time, your talent, your resources to serving him and honoring him, that then you'll find your life. And so I was interested in a study that was done by Gallup not too long ago, and they said, most Americans are relatively happy, and happiness, by their definition, had to do with receiving and getting and sometimes taking. And so most Americans are happy because most of our needs are relatively satisfied. We have enough to eat, most of us. We have enough clothing, we have enough shelter, transportation, some discretionary wealth, and so we're relatively happy. But happiness is transitory. You have a nice meal, and 5 hours later you're hungry. Clothes wear out, automobiles wear out. Money comes and it goes, and so it's transitory. And so they said, most Americans appear to be relatively happy. But they also said this, the poll indicated that a great many Americans don't find any real purpose or significance or meaning to their existence. And the interesting thing is they said, purpose and meaning and significance doesn't come from getting and taking and receiving. It comes from giving and sometimes sacrificing. And so they said lots of times people don't find real significance or purpose in their life. So I went to Haiti a few years ago with Don McClannon. Don was the founder of FCA back in the 1950s, and we visited one of Mother Teresa's homes. And this one was a little different than some of the other hospitals. This was for kids who were 3 years of age and younger, and they were all terminal. Most of them had AIDS. None of them were going to survive. I saw this Sister of Mercy, and she was from Canada, and I figured she could speak English, so I got her aside, and I said, how do you do this? And she said, what do you mean? I knew that she had just taken her vows. Somebody had told me that. So she couldn't go home to see her family for 10 years. And she was on call 7 days a week. And every one of her patients was going to die. I said, how do you do this? And she said, well, it's not that hard. We have 3 hours a day where we can have personal devotions, and we spend time in prayer and meditation and the scriptures, and she said that sustains us. And I could sense from talking to her that this probably wasn't a very happy place. She didn't make any money, couldn't see her family for a long time. She was losing every battle with every patient. But the thing that was sustaining to her was purpose and meaning and significance, because what she was doing had meaning and it had purpose, and it was serving Jesus, because Mother Teresa said that inasmuch as you do it to any one of these individuals who are needing and hurting, you're doing it unto Jesus, and that's what they believe. And so I guess what I've found is this, that if you do honor him and serve him and decide to make that commitment to him, that there'll be some things that will accrue to you. And I guess this has been over time. I made that commitment when I was 20. And I've not been a perfect person. None of us are perfect. But I guess over time I've learned a few things. And one thing is that we will have purpose and we'll have meaning in our lives. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And that doesn't mean that every investment's going to make money. Doesn't mean that you win every game. Doesn't mean that you'll always be healthy. But what it means is simply this, that when it's all over, you can look back and say, that was worth doing. It had meaning, it had purpose. It was a significant way to live. And I guess that's all we can ask of life, is that it makes sense. The second thing I think that will accrue to you is you'll be given the strength to serve. And so remember in Isaiah it says, those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. And so you'll be given the strength to do what you got to do. And I'll be honest with you, when I got up at 6 this morning, I felt a little beat down. I'd had a long week, and I've got some other things going on. And I wonder, I'm not sure I can do this really very well. But you're always given the strength to do what you got to do. If you serve him and honor him, he will sustain you. And so there's this verse in 2 Timothy 1:7. Somebody gave that to me before we played in a national championship game against Florida. And it went like this. He said, for God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and of love and self-discipline. And so I read that to our players before we went out on the field, and they say, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Guy give a verse of scripture to his players before he go out and play for a national championship. But the reason I did that was it really fit that team, because we obviously weren't timid, and we had a great sense of power and a great sense of love. Those players loved each other. They cared for each other. They would sacrifice for each other, and they had great self-discipline. And so I think you'll be given the strength to serve. You'll be given discipline. You'll be given love and a sense of power. So you'll be able to do what you have to do. It may not always be fun, but you'll be able to do what you have to do. The third thing, I think, is a sense of stability. And one of the interesting things about athletics is that there was very little middle ground. And I think David McWilliams and Dennis and some of the high school coaches here can attest to that. You win a big game, people want to anoint you and say great things about you. You win a championship or something, they want to put you up on a pedestal. But then you lose a big game. If you have a bad year, they want to run you out of town on a rail. And so it's either up here or it's down here, not much in the middle. Most people live most of their life in the middle, coaching not so much.